Hello everyone, my name is Joy, and oh dear, it's time for another response video. On the 29th of March, 2019, Stephen Woodford, aka Rationality Rules, uploaded a video entitled "The Athletic Advantage of Transgender Women and Why It's Unfair." After watching this utter wreck of a video, well, I had some thoughts. This topic kind of exploded on the internet as the latest in a long line of trans equality issues. So, let's look at his assertions, shall we? The video starts with a tweet dated 21st of March showing a question polling his audience whether or not he should tackle the topic of trans women's so-called advantage in many sports, which he claims the evidence is overwhelming. 79% of the poll returned a verdict of they agree and that he should make it. This is a poor position to start from as an audience. Why should anyone agree with this position before being exposed to any evidence? The attitude here is working backwards from the conclusion. Even if that's just the expectation of this video's reception, it's still kind of flawed. The video continues onto a clip of Piers Morgan arguing that trans women competing with cis women is unfair and unequal. Piers freaking Morgan! That well-known expert in physiology, endocrinology, sports medicine, doctoring things. Oh no, wait! He's none of those! Again, more evidence of working backwards from the conclusion. Woodford then goes on to list 3 trans women who have won various athletic events, as if that's enough of conclusive proof to suggest that trans women do have an unfair advantage. It's not. He then trots out the poor story of Selena Soul, an example of a cisgender woman who competed against trans women, Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood, who outperformed her, and she lost out on a scholarship. Sucks to be her, but the point that's not emphasized is she was also beaten by 5 other cis athletes. This is misrepresentation of the facts. Woodford uses manipulative language in this section, saying the trans women competitors so easily took first and second place, and that Selena has had to bravely explain why she feels cheated. His 3 primary arguments built into the video go thusly. Professor Alice Cashmore, in the Piers Morgan clip, suggests that we embrace inclusivity by assigning the person to whatever event their present-day sex suggests they should compete in. Woodford attacks this by making it all about someone's identity and chromosomes and not actually taking into account any physical transition. Identifying as a certain sex is different than identifying as a certain gender. Sex characteristics, or the physical ones at least, are made up of things like genitals, gonads, hormone levels, secondary sex characteristics, e.g. breast tissue, facial hair, muscle mass, fat distribution, not just chromosomes. So someone who has physically transitioned with HRT has some differences in these characteristics than they did before, aligning more closely with their new biological sex. I mean, there's a reason gender confirmation therapy used to be called a sex change. Okay, so I digressed a little bit. Woodford then continues the identity thing to its ad absurdum conclusion, a fallacy all on its own. Quote, if the majority believed that age was just a cultural construct, would this make it fair for Thor Bjornsson to compete as a senior? No. If the majority believed that weight categories are fat-shaming, would this make it fair for Anthony Joshua to compete as a featherweight? No, of course not. End quote. He doesn't outright say it, but at this point he might as well be a 14-year-old shitposter giving the "I'm an attack helicopter" spiel. The difference between just one's identity and characteristics like age, weight, and sex is that one is contained within the mind, the others are physical and physiological. Woodford does point out that this was his weakest argument, but fails to explain why, like I just did. The second argument is all about hormone levels, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here because of certain events that happened next. But let it be known that Woodford presents 4 video clip instances of people explaining why having testosterone levels similar to or equal than a cisgender woman is fair, but then seems to completely ignore this fact. Quote, I don't just find this argument flawed, I find it utterly ridiculous. End quote. I'm sorry, scientific evidence is ridiculous to you? He makes a horrible analogy comparing people to Formula 1 cars, followed by comparing cis women to cis men, not trans women. Quote, the assertion that reducing a transgender woman's testosterone to that of the average biological woman will create a level playing field is objectively, scientifically bogus. End quote. And you would know this how? By comparing women to men? That's bogus. The third argument is about the individual variation between people. Again, playing clips that back up this no true level playing field situation. And Woodford himself admits to finding that this being the most compelling argument. However, he still disagrees. For some reason. He dismisses mixed gender sports because too many women would be disadvantaged. And I don't exactly disagree with that, but then he makes an ad absurdum argument and calls it a logical conclusion, without offering any actual, workable, real-world solutions. And Woodford concludes by inviting us, the audience, if we disagree, to produce any counter-arguments, because he said that if he's wrong, he wants to know about it. The evidence of what happened next showed that was a lie. The channel Essence of Thought released a rebuttal video on the 6th of April 2009 called Refuting the Anti-Trans Pseudoscience on Trans Athletes, RE Rationality Rules. Link in the description. I have to take a moment just to say I love this channel, especially for their work regarding the Parkfield School in Birmingham and their LGBT plus inclusivity program. But again, I digressed. So, Essence of Thought host Peter Ethel slams Woodford with so much science. It's really satisfying to watch, and I adjure you, if you haven't already seen it, just go watch it. It's very satisfying. And this is why I haven't refuted all of the biology involved with Woodford's second argument, because it's already been done by them. Far be it from me to risk redundancy or treading on anybody else's toes. But that that's not where the story ends, because as you know, YouTube videos have comments. The Rationality Rules comment on his own video reads thus: "This video has been public for 7 minutes, half the video length, and I've already had accusations of transphobia and people unsubscribing. I could write a lengthy reason as to why I'm pro-trans on the vast majority of issues, but do you know what? I'm happy to lose the viewership of such fickle people. Take care and have a good life." Oh, you should care. If people are interpreting what you've said as transphobia, if you didn't mean that, you would be concerned. But you're not, and that's rather telling. So, I know, if I just called him a transphobe, that would go nowhere, it would be unproductive. So, I left a comment reading thus: "Respectfully, I disagree. I suggest you change the language you use when talking about this topic. The word is cisgender. This is a completely valid descriptor. Saying that a biological woman is the opposite of a trans woman is to misrepresent any and all biological effects on the brain structures of trans people, as well as any and all physical changes they have made in transition. The argument about testosterone holds little weight, because although the rules may state that a trans woman must have been on HRT for at least a year, this doesn't take into account any or all other transitional changes. Transition doesn't stop at HRT, at least not for some people. Also, you made no mention of how the effect of transition affect the other physiological broad differences between AMAB and AFAB people. Finally, if the rule creators aren't happy with allowing a free-for-all scenario, but gender alone isn't considered the fairest way to divide people, then some attempt should be made to find or create fairer categories based on ability, not just gender. This circumvents the ad absurdum conclusion." I mean, the reason I said that is because throughout his video he uses the term biological woman, and the last part was because it's not like he proposed any workable solutions. So I want to highlight a couple of comments by a commenter called Yvette Spaghetti. "As a trans woman, I agree with you. Trans women should have their own category. It's unfair for them to compete with cis women. Edit, thanks for all the likes." How about this one? By Stephanie Rosenberg. "As a transgender woman, I can say that in my opinion you are correct in saying that we should not compete against genetic women. I do not find anything here that suggests transphobia, and to claim that it does is to diminish the very notion of the term and cause unnecessary negativity towards members of the trans community who wish to live their lives in peace, acceptance, and common sense. Well done." These kinds of comments were the ones I noticed got a heart from RR, but comments like mine, or the fairly lengthy passage by user 264354287, well, those comments got ignored. So what happened next? Well, RR himself posted a comment on the Essence of Thought video. It goes like this. Quote, "I get that some people will think that I'm being a tiny bit unfair here," end quote. "Yes, opening with my conclusion rather than my arguments and calling me an alt-right man is unfair. Add this to you saying that I create soft Shapiro videos to cash in on far-right paychecks, and your disingenuous disposition is crystal clear. I always like to listen to responses to my videos, as if I'm wrong I want to know it, but I'm 6 minutes in now and I'm done. If I misrepresented so many times so quickly, I'm not going to waste my time watching the rest. It's a shame, as you're obviously a smart guy, and if you were only more sincere, this could have developed into a productive conversation." have some thoughts about that. First of all, it's condescending as fuck. Second of all, 6 minutes in? The first 4 minutes weren't even about you. Things got kind of heated. So much so that bigger YouTubers got involved, like Luxander. Quote, "We have to draw the line somewhere," end quote, and the proposal seems to be trans people just don't get to participate? Sounds legit. Essence of Thought replied, "It's funny how people who assert that always assume they get to draw the line." Luxander replied to that, "If they have the same muscle mass as a cis woman due to having similar levels of testosterone, how could they possibly reasonably compete with cis men?" Things got even more heated when Godless Cranium got involved, saying, "I hope you come back because being wrong about this, and for the record I think you are, and EOT shows why with ample evidence, can lead to further harm in the real world to a tiny minority of people who already face discrimination and hatred on a daily basis. You have a large following and you have a large influence. This is an important topic. Please give it a watch, RR, or at the very least, look through his sources and decide from there if it's something you need to reevaluate in the future." I would like to point out that RR does in fact concede that he will read the sources, so that's something. And finally, of course, we have Essence of Thought's comments on the original Rationality Rules video, that goes along the lines of "formed a response linked below," and then a whole bunch of commenters weigh in. So Essence of Thought replies with, "Here's a challenge to the naysayers in this thread. Do what the liar Rationality Rules never did. Supply research comparing trans women in HRT, not cis men like RR did, to cis women, which demonstrates trans women to have an advantage, like was advertised but never delivered by RR. Simple task." Eventually, we come to the Essence of Thought's conclusion about Rationality Rules, saying, "Such a shame that RR has made clear that he has no intention to admit his errors." Whew. So, that was a lot to get through, and I think it's rather telling. So now I've got to come to my own conclusion. Is Stephen Woodford a TERF? Well, let's look at some facts. Woodford's Kickstarter project lasted from 23rd of February to 28th of March. That is to say that it ended the day before this video was published. Now, why is that? I mean, did he, and it does look this way, deliberately decide to make and release this video with potentially controversial content after his fundraiser, which I contributed to, ended? You might just call me butthurt by this, but wouldn't I have a right to be? Have I and other trans people in Woodford's audience been bait and switch swindled? Sadly, this evidence is too circumstantial to prove anything, but at the very least, it's suspicious. So I want to make a closer examination of what Woodford said in his actual video. Quote, "It's not about whether or not transgender people should be allowed to use certain bathrooms or if they should be allowed to join gender-specific, non-competitive clubs, etc." End quote. What, not even darts? Oh, come on. Look, this is no better than the "I'm not transphobic, but" kind of arguments that we've heard time and time again. How about some more? Quote, "I'm convinced that unless quickly rectified, this will kill women's sports, end quote. Again, that kind of sounds like fear-mongering to me. What about this one? Quote, we have to draw the line somewhere, end quote, as was pointed out by Luxander. Or this one, quote, I don't want to see the day when women's athletics is dominated by Y chromosomes, end quote. What happens in athletics is nothing to do with what you want. Also, what about intersex people? Again, Essence of Thought video went into much more detail about that. But something strikes me about these particular sentences. They ring so much like TERF dog whistles that they remind me of what happened last July at a little thing called London Pride 2018. You know, that event that I was there for and that I covered, and that video has the most hits of any of my videos so far. Something about a little protest called Get the L Out. Quote, we want to get the L out of Pride. A man cannot be a lesbian. A person with a penis cannot be a lesbian. End quote. Fun times. Fun. Good memories. Really. I'll link that video down below just because it's funny. So, Stephen. Mr. Woodford. Stevie, baby. You appear to have a little turfishness on you. It's not a good look. Okay, so someone out there might accuse me of quote mining, but I haven't taken anything that Woodford said out of context. And these statements sound like dog whistles to me. Of course, the point behind that is, though, that dog whistles are so difficult to prove because they are ambiguous by design. That's the insidious part. Is Rationality Rules a TERF? I'm still going to probably have to land on the side of no, only on the grounds that nothing he's ever done comes close to suggesting one way or another that he's anything resembling any kind of feminist, radical or otherwise. But the quotes from this video scream trans exclusion. The fact that he doesn't offer any solutions to what he deems a problem backs up my assessment. Furthermore, I mean, come on, Stevie, did you actually consult with any trans people when making this video? Because it seems like you didn't. It's not fair to represent trans people in this way without including us in the discussion. I don't think it's fair, and make no mistake, Woodford himself does argue a number of times on the basis of fairness. I don't think it's fair for a cis person to make a presentation about trans people without at least consulting with one of us. Because the research that you presented, flawed though it might have been, also serves the purpose of reducing us to nothing but hormones and statistics. That's dehumanizing, insulting, and wrong. So, what's my dog in this race? Well, I'm not into sport, kinda obviously, but this kind of thing does reflect on me and the trans community. As someone currently in the long waiting list for HRT, the last thing I or any other trans person needs is more barriers to access caused by people who listen to this kind of flawed argument thinking that there might be some kind of ulterior motive behind it, behind our desire to transition. That's why this affects us all negatively, and it is transphobic. So, based on that conclusion, I'm afraid the only thing I have left to do is this. So there's my thoughts on this. To my audience, I hope to see you again next time. Bye.